Well, welcome. Um, just to make sure we are good. Um, Sounds like we're live. Um, okay. Well, thank you for joining me. Uh, at least judging by the the number of current viewers, uh, a lot of you will catch us in retrospect, which is fine. Um, so this week has been a week. Um, this week, uh, the past few days. Um, so uh, it's been a few minutes since I've done a few of these horror readings. So I just want to read through some of the poetry of Edgar Allan Poe and chat about chat about some of the elements that I like about it. The I really enjoyed how the Telltale Heart came out. I recorded right after that. We just kind of like left it rolling and recorded this kind of like, ooh, what did I think about it? I debated posting it. I didn't end up posting it, but um, it was it was cool to be able to feel like I poured enough emotion into that it felt lively. Like there was one point at the end where I felt uh, like I might cry. And it's very interesting to see that because I don't know if it was cry, right? I mean, it's not like the story is very macabre and not not exactly a tearjerker, right? But it was more that it was just interesting to see that it was like putting that much emotion out, right? Of trying to affect this like really weird, bizarre, nervous, uh, kind of psychopath. Uh, I always get mixed up between the differences between sociopath and psychopath, but clearly someone who is disturbed and just like pouring myself into that. It was really kind of surreal, right? I felt like it was to have this like really cool, I don't know, artistry moment where it was, yeah, it was just surreal. So, um, I thought I might read a few of the poems of Edgar Allan, Mr. Poe. Um, I I remember being I remember being like 14, 16, 12. I don't know. So those were all good years. Somewhere around there. And I just remember, I remember being like, I was always the hopeless romantic, right? I was always the love sick guy that uh, I had the honor of dating some very cool ladies during that time. Uh, and as teenage life goes, some of the people you date, you're going, yeah, you were educational, uh, which I kind of imagine they might say that about me, meaning like, you helped me figure out more of what I didn't want in a romantic partner, uh, which is fine, right? That's how it goes. So anyhow, I remember sometimes just writing these like very like romantic grandiose love poems, uh sometimes about sometimes about these girls that I just thought I was so head over heels with in love, right, as a wise old 16-year-old. And sometimes I wasn't even sometimes I didn't even have a girlfriend. I was just writing, writing these like love poems, these sonnets. So when I read the poetry of Poe, I guess that's what I really like about uh, some of these things, right? Like, and the I don't know, just the like the longing, the revelry in the self pitying kind of prose. Um, I, I guess I just found that so like beautifully tragic. Uh, which is funny to describe all this out loud. It's just like, this was Neil and his emo phase. Back in my day, we didn't understand what emo was. We just got emotional. But one of the poems that comes to mind when I think about this was or is the poem Annabel Lee. So I'll read this for you. Uh, Edgar Allan Poe's poem Annabel Lee. It was many and many a year ago, in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden there lived, whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. I was a child and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea, but we loved with a love that was more than love, I and my Annabel Lee, with a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. And this was the reason that long ago, in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud, chilling my beautiful Annabel Lee, so that her high-born kinsman came and bore her away from me, to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. The angels, not half so happy in heaven, went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know, in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out of the cloud by night, chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. But our love, it was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we, of many far wiser than we, and neither the angels in heaven above nor the demons down under the sea can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee, and the stars never rise but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And so all the night tide I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in the sepulchre by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea. I I really enjoy again, it's like it's clearly a tragic tale. Uh it is interesting to see that the art that we oftentimes enjoy. I mean, think about the stories that you enjoy reading, right? The movies you watch, the shows you watch. I mean, these are all things that uh, we want the drama. Uh, it, it, like think of how often that is used as a negative descriptor of someone. Like he or she's such a drama queen, right? And yet, right, that person is in love with drama, right? And yet, are we not all to some degree in love with drama? Are we not all basically looking for the dramatic in our art? Uh, to have a to have a story with very little conflict, right? Here's the story of John and Sally. They seem to get along. They don't really have any disputes. They get along with their neighbors. They have a job that is not all that remarkable, but it pays the bills and it's pretty good. Like even as I describe this, idyllic and very boring thing, you're thinking, okay, what's coming, right? Certainly, the buffetings of reality and tragedy are like waiting in the wings, right? Like ready to bite at their heels. Um, it's fascinating to stop and think about that. when we describe something like that, we both know that to have a uneventful life is the ideal, and it is also something that really, if it does come, does not hang around forever. And we even, if we're honest with ourselves, we even might have a bit of a, like a petulant, right, kind of the dark side of ourselves is kind of wishing like, yeah, something's going to come along and smack them, right, because something comes along and smacks us eventually, right. um Now, I am not necessarily saying I am one who has led some uh, deep and dark, a life of either depravity of myself or uh, the suffering of, at the hands of other people. But and I've never had, my love pass away from me, right? Um, as I discussed in the intro video for A Winter of Horror about this philosophical paper that a friend of mine recommended to me. Um, this guy was basically saying that when we watch like these crazy, I mean, and he suggested horror movies that from what I understand, they're a little, to say the least, outside of my personal kind of soft and squishy comfort zone of horror movies, right? I think he recommended Hereditary and a couple of these others um that I've read the synopsis. It sounds gripping, but ooh, I think it might be a little too much for me, and that's okay, right? We all got to find our limits there. um but it's interesting to see this, like his point is that by reading these very macabre and very stark contrasting, kind of like, whoa, that is highly dramatic, right, that is highly tragic and sad and things like this. um it gives us a way to safely grapple with the strange things of reality. It's like actually case in point, I was talking with someone today at work. This person is from Mexico, and I asked her how her weekend was going, and she said that she took her family to a monster truck rally. And I was saying, have they been to this before, is that their kind of thing? She was saying, oh yeah, they loved it, but it happened to be that uh the the last monster truck rally they went to, there were not the right kind of safety precautions taken, and people in these stands got hurt from some accidents, some tragic thing. And I mean, I think she might have mentioned that people had died, right? And she mentioned that they had a lot more fun at this one because, even though the monster truck is still down there crunching cars and is affecting a sort of very chaotic violence, if you will, being able to watch it safely from the stands can be almost this like catharsis, right? Now, it's kind of funny to think of it's funny to think of monster truck rallies as a, a form of catharsis, but it, what else is it, right? In the same way that uh, if we were walking down the street and we saw a monster truck, rolling over cars and crunching them, we would have a much more panicked and fearful and frightful kind of like, what in the world is going on here, right? But when we can watch it safely, when there's this notion of, I know what is happening is violent and maybe even, a wanton display of it, right? And yet we're able to say this is all part of the show. In the same way, this article is talking about when we engage in uh, the macabre, when we engage in horror stories that seem rather, in our face and frightful. um, it, it's fine, because our brain knows it's safe, and we're able to look, kind of stare into the abyss with like a guardrail up, which I don't know. I don't know that Frederick Nietzsche was was indicating there might or might not be a guardrail. Um, but yeah, I think about that when I think about the interesting notion of why we engage in the dramatic, why we engage in things that we don't. I mean, think of all the anti-hero things that have been a huge popular thing in the last 10, 20 years. um, we probably realize and probably wouldn't recommend to a friend to go become a Walter White, right? Go learn how to cook various street drugs and try it out, right? Like, uh, go engage in this like slow descent into some very questionable ethical and questionable, moral areas, to say the least. And yet to watch it from the safety of our couch in our pajamas, uh, this can be an interesting thing that we can engage in and then step away from. Um, I find that fascinating. I wanted to read another Edgar Allan Poe um, poem here. This is one of my this is one of my favorite ones because uh, I'm sure we could go and look at the Wikipedia page and figure out what he was thinking of specifically. But I love the visual imagery used in here. It evokes a lot of very again a bit of curious, uh, very incongruent states of like fanciful theater going and violence, right? And just kind of a like, ooh, wow, did he have a bad time at the opera or something? I'm not sure. Um, this is The Conqueror Worm by Edgar Allan Poe. Lo, it is a gala night within the lonesome latter years, an angel throng bewinged, bedight in veils and drowned in tears, sit in a theatre to see a play of hopes and fears, while the orchestra breathes fitfully the music of the spheres. Mimes in the form of God on high mutter and mumble low, and hither and thither fly, mere puppets they who come and go, at bidding of vast formless things that shift the scenery to and fro, flapping from out their condor wings invisible woe. That motley drama, oh, be sure it shall not be forgot, with its phantom chased forevermore by a crowd that sees it not, through a circle that ever returneth in to the self same spot, and much of madness and more of sin, and horror the soul of the plot. But see, amid the mimic rout, a crawling shape intrude, a blood-red thing that writhes from out the scenic solitude. It writhes with mortal pangs, the mimes become its food, and seraphs sob at vermin fangs in human gore imbued. Out, out are the lights, out all, and over each quivering form the curtain of funeral pall comes down with the rush of a storm, while the angels, all pallid and wan, uprising, unveiling, affirm that the play is the tragedy man, and its hero, the conqueror worm. So, like, there's imagery in that, right? There's curious elements of uh similitude and some of these things, but you also just think of like, okay, so there's this like blood red worm serpent. I mean, I picture some sort of big thing like the sandworms from Dune or something, right? That just like rise up and eat eat this crowd who has gone to see this play, right? So like just like eating the crowd, eating the actors. Um, I'm not exactly sure what got stuck in poor Edgar's craw, but that was certainly yeah, that's uh that's one of my favorite ones. Um so looking through some more of these, I mean, I'm the obvious one that that we all know and love, right, is the Raven. I for certain will get to that. Don't you worry. I love that. I think I could read the Raven uh, every day and still appreciate it more and more. Uh, I almost am sad sometimes at like the idea of like I remember my English teacher in high school talking to me about it, and just I mean I had multiple English teachers that sang the praise of it, but it still is this kind of it's just this piece that uh really seems to never be fully adequately explained uh by the people who tried to hype it up, right? um it is the kind of thing that perhaps at the risk of being being flippant or being some form of theologically perverse, it's the kind of thing that feels almost like scripture, um, in that uh, the words of the poem are consistent, right? They have been consistent for a long time now, but to come back and appreciate it as a work of art over the years, I have come back time and time again as I have changed, as I have grown, and I have really come to appreciate it. Um, uh, should we should we read it? Maybe we should read it. it's it's hard to hype it up that way and not read it, huh? So okay. Um yeah, so yeah, I love this so much. This is one of those I've been excited to read this with you, dear friend, since this idea of readers theater came about. So um I see that we have one current viewer, and thank you for joining me live. I really appreciate it. To everyone else watching afterwards, I really appreciate you as well. Um, I I have clearly not figured out how to YouTube stream effectively, because every time I think, okay, I'm going to just like pop in and go live, uh, it it like somehow like doesn't start the stream, so sometimes I'll just be sitting there and chatting to like, dead air. And then other times like tonight where I was like, okay, I'm going to schedule this out and then figure out how to do it. Nope, you're live. So I kind of meant to do this starting 20, 30 minutes later, but here we are. So to everyone joining us, I really appreciate you being here with me, regardless of when you find yourself here with us. The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping, rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door, "only this, and nothing more." Ah, distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books a crease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here for evermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. Sir, said I, or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is, I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping, tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door, darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, Lenore? This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, Lenore. Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping somewhat louder than before. Surely, said I, surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more. Open here I flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou, I said, art sure no craven. Ghastly grim and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore, tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Much I marvelled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculpted bust above his chamber door, with such a name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, Other friends have flown before, on the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, Nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, Doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore of nevermore. But the raven, still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then, upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloated o'er she shall press, nevermore. Then, methought, the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still of bird or devil, Whether tempter sent, or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate, yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul, with sorrow laden, within the distant Aidenn, it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels named Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. Oof. I love it. I love that. I mean, there's, again, like I said, there's so much to love about this, right? I mean, like, I can't tell if you, if you heard, but I can't help but get like choked up at like some of the lines, right? Like, take thy beak from out my heart, right? It's just so thick. It just dripping with like I don't know, right? This like almost that's why it's funny that like we make fun of like, you know, the emo crowd, right? And yet like this is effectively the same uh deep psychology that humans experience, I believe, right, in all ages. We are trying to grapple with uh, this strange and weird thing known as human life. We know some very uncomfortable truths. We know that on a long enough timeline, and rarely is it ever truly as long as we might fully like to control, that everyone will die. We know that towards the end of life, there is definitely a penchant for the human body to break down and quality of life declines. We know that there are sicknesses and there are sorrows, and especially in today's understanding more about mental health and things like that, right? These are all things that we know, right? It's as I describe these things, these are not happy things. You're not thinking genial. Thanks. I really appreciate you bringing that up, right? And yet, obviously, for the most part, we tend to have two reactions to those things, right? These uncomfortable truths. We either try to dull our senses to them. It's probably oversimplified to say the least, but I think that generally all forms of a lot of engaging in entertainment, a lot of engaging in various substances we like to entertain ourselves with, if you will. These can be used in part to dull the senses, right? To prolong time to time when we need to think about these uncomfortable truths. There is also an element of we know if we were to go around and really fixate on these uncomfortable truths just all day long, that even if we could mentally survive that, I don't know. I don't know that our friends and our family would like really appreciate, like, ah, there comes Neil again, ready to tell us more about how, everyone will die. Like, well, okay, yes, no one's going to debate you on that, but that feels like the ultimate wet blanket at the party kind of move, right? And yet, the other reaction we can have to these uncomfortable truths is to grapple with them. Uh, I have been studying a bit of very, very little, as in I'm just starting to get into it, but starting to get into the philosophy of yoga, right? Eastern Indian religion. And it's very fascinating to see. Um, I apologize if you could hear my dryer. Uh, my dryer recently broke the knob to turn off the it's done indicator broke, and it broke off in the on position. So maybe there's a third way that we interact with the uncomfortable truths of life is we just have to keep fixing our washers and dryers and that kind of stuff. Yay. Uh, uh, but the Eastern religion of like the yogic approach to things, um, it is it is fascinating to see that it has a lot of parallels um, to some of the schools of thought in modern psychology. That again, I'm no psychologist. I'm not a PhD psychologist or anything, but I like to learn about this stuff, right? To know ourselves and to try to grapple with and maybe even in a way conquer ourselves, um, or at least effectively learn to grapple with and be at peace with the parts that we find abhorrent. Um, I think that's a very powerful thing in life. Uh, a way to grapple with this again is to read art, right? That's why I hesitated to say, well, art is just all about kind of dulling our senses until we die, right? What a nihilistic thing that is, right? There is an element of uh, the indulgence, right? And I might even be tempted to say the overindulgence of art sometimes is to fill the empty space so that we are not alone with our thoughts. I am definitely guilty of that. Um, but there's also an element of art that it's really what I hope to do with this channel, right? What I've hoped to do with many different forms of art is to add my voice to the myriad of human voices in the pantheon of human expression that gets us to think about some of the aspects of these uncomfortable truths, right? A song by Bleachers uh, has a lyric that I think about often that says, everyone must die for anything to matter. uh, I think that is again, it points out it points out an uncomfortable truth, but is beautiful because it reminds us that we don't, for whatever strange human psychology reason, we don't tend to appreciate the things we have when we have them nearly as much as we appreciate the loss of them. Uh, There's strong psychological studies, a host of psychological studies to affirm the idea that we fear losing something that is a more powerful um, impetus for action than the than the desire to acquire something. That's kind of strange, right? It certainly can be used by our brains to get into weird and ineffective mindsets, right? Sometimes that the devil we know instead of the devil we don't, right? I don't know. It's fascinating to think about all that, and then think about this. To me, is why I really appreciate reading fine works by Edgar Allan Poe. Now we're reading poetry because I mean honestly it's a stream, and I debated reading some of the other things, and quite quite frankly, I have had a hard time streaming and having it be at a quality that I didn't watch back and go, this looks like it was filmed on a potato. This makes me angry. so so I am, I don't know, for the now two lovely viewers that we have with us. I would love if you could just rate in the chat, like rate on a how you personally feel the video quality is from like 1 to 10, right? 10 being like uh I'm sitting there in the room with you, right? And 1 being like this is a potato, right? Like I can tell that maybe you are kind of Neil, but that's only because your blockiness, I have to squint with my brain and it kind of looks like the previous versions of Neil I've seen. So I don't know. It would be fascinating to know uh what you think of the streaming quality. I think it's a bit better. Because I've got just a little like monitor over here that it looks good over here, and then I will turn and look and go, okay, I think it looks good on the the YouTube's viewer thing, and then I'll watch back and be like, this looks anyhow. I am weirdly obsessed with trying to get like high quality stuff, um, and yet it doesn't really matter because yeah, I watch videos all the time by people that are not using some sort of uh, Ari Alexa cinema grade camera or whatever, and it's still fine. So, anyhow, um, uh, so um, we have to read a few of the Edgar Allan Poe poems that I want to. Um, thank you for being here. I I kind of wanted to at least highlight some of the things that I wanted to read coming up. One of them being this awesome book. This is Tales of the Macabre West by my buddy Ben Hodson. This is this is a great um, Ben is a hero of mine, uh, mainly just because he is such a doer of things, right? Um, I tend to have a million and one ideas that I think would be interesting to do, but I get lost in that. Well, until I can make sure that it looks, like it was filmed on a cinema grade camera, I can't possibly do a reader's theater kind of thing. And yet, why not? Right? Why? What difference does it make? Um, at least when you're starting out, right? By all means, I would love to get to the point where there is enough of a demand for high quality that we really feel like the quality of the video or audio is the true bottleneck holding us back from the next level of uh, better serving those around us with art and with introduction to wonderful stories. That'll be then. So Tales of the Macabre West. There are there are 5 stories in here, right? So let me just read the like synopsis of these. Um, right, the back of the book says 5 thrilling tales of death in the Old West: the gallows at Rocky Point, the Scarecrow, Friend or Fiend, the unfinished business of Bill Parsons, a disappearing town. Um, yeah, I I really enjoyed these because like Western stuff, right? Like cowboys, Native Americans, like there's so many fascinating elements to that that uh we tend to just kind of approach it from this like, well, John Wayne or Oklahoma. My kids were watching Oklahoma last night, right? The musical. Um and we tend to kind of have like the same recurring tropes. And so I really enjoy art that takes a familiar trope and turns it on its head, right? Takes a familiar setting and introduces something that uh is strange and jarring. Now, there's what was that Daniel Craig movie that came out a long time? It was Cowboys and Aliens. Um I mean, I hope to not offend anyone here, but that was a bit too far for me. Just because it was so far, it was like, well, I know I could pick like, I mean, aliens, right? This was not the aliens featured in there, but like, if we're talking like xenomorphs, right? Yes, I know we could put xenomorphs in some sort of like Western town. That would certainly be unexpected. That would not go with the usual settings of either one of those universes. But it, I feel like it'd be so on the nose with incongruence, right? That would be like, well, yeah, okay, you just threw a dart and said those are two weird things. Let's shove them together. Um, the the thing more of what I think about a movie like Bone Tomahawk. Uh, Bone Tomahawk, right, is about like a western town, and then you've got uh basically a group of what are kind of assumed to be like indigenous people, but there's some sort of like strange darkness about like their actions and activities, and they are, cannibals. uh it's a interesting story. um I mean, frankly, I'll be honest and say maybe from like that perspective, like uh it might not be the most PC element. I'm not sure, right? I appreciate things that, I mean, and obviously we want to be thoughtful in our approach to things and not some tropes are just old and outdated in the like, yeah, like we've learned to think more effectively that way. So um I'm simply saying that when I watch something like Bone Tomahawk, it makes me curious and really like hungry for things like, well, where are more magic systems in the West? And I'm not talking about like wizards and, like Harry Potter so much, but uh, I I got a chance to talk to Ben about this and ask him like, hey, would it be okay if I read one of these stories online? And he was like, oh yeah, that'd be great. So yeah, I will. I think I will read that sometime on a stream this week. Um, but there's a lot of really interesting ways to introduce things like the that weird, scary, nebulous, ambiguous kind of side of horror, right? I Like, I still think there's a lot of room for like Lovecraftian cosmic horror and like the West, right? Like Western stuff to be like brought together. Uh, I well, sometime we'll have to talk about how somewhere at a undisclosed location in the Mojave Desert, um, I have found a number of like circles made out of branches, and yeah, I mean these are big, like 20 feet across, like big branches. There's no inlet into them. At least from what I can tell, there's no real like I can't figure out a purpose for them, and I've tried to look online to see if, like branch circles online. I have been able to find them. Uh Now, I'm guessing like a lot of these things that the explanation is probably more simple than not. They probably are some sort of um a remnant of Native American uh, groups passing through there at some point. I'm not sure, right? I really would like to learn more. But the unknowing, I love that. I absolutely love that because it's a ton of fun to just sit there and go, what is up with this? What could this mean? Right? So I'll have to, that actually would be a lot of fun to hop on there. I took a bunch of photos. So maybe that could be the like real life unexplained unexplained mysteries or something. Um the Yeah. So, I still have this was a book that a buddy of mine got for me a number of years ago, and like I love it just because it's like a, it's like Canterbury Classics, right? A collection of like just like classic horror stories, right? Some of reading the Telltale Heart, that was from here. Um, there there's a couple other ones. I mean, there's like The Fall of the House of Usher by Poe, The Devil and Tom Walker, uh The Willows by Algernon Blackwood. I definitely would like to read The Willows, and I most assuredly, I mean, like almost the thing that made me want to do this whole a winter of horror kind of thing um is let's see if I can find it. Uh, do, 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 do. Oh, is it not in here? Well, I mean, let's not tempt it too much. It's the Wendigo, right? Yeah, man, I could have sworn this book had it. Uh, the Willows. Yep, that's funny. I mean, like the Willows is a good one, um, by Algernon Blackwood, but I still consider the Wendigo um like one of the like kind of all time um I don't know, like all time important horror stories out there. Um so yeah, I mean things like The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe. Um uh, yeah. It's fun to look through this. And it's got some Lovecraft stories in here as well. Um which yeah, like The Tree by H.P. Lovecraft, The Tomb by H.P. Lovecraft. Um so um yeah, a lot of yeah, The Shunned House by H.P. Lovecraft. Um so anyhow, um I I really enjoy looking through here and just thinking about all the different stories, right? It is fascinating to see, uh, especially to see the age on some of these things, right? Yeah, I mean it's fascinating to see like uh, you know Poe was riding around like what was it, the Gilded Age, right? Of kind of U.S. history, so like 19, or sorry, 19 18 40s, 18 50s ish. um and to think about that, like Poe to like something like Lovecraft, for example, that or Algernon Blackwood, right? Blackwood was writing stuff in uh, let's see here, right? Yeah, the Willows, 1907, right? So to think like Poe, um, right? Poe wrote The Raven in 1845. So to think like 1845 to 1907, right? Like 55 years. Was it so 65-ish years, right? Don't at me on the math there. Uh, but like to think about the span of 65 years and to see the amount of influence that those two have had, um, to see the influence of H.P. Lovecraft and some of that, right? It's fascinating to see some of those things. Um, so I guess I'm kind of debating on reading one more, um, just because Poe is such a champ. And I don't know that we could ever have too much Poe, right? So I'm debating between uh like the Black Cat is a bit lengthy. Uh uh the Pit and the Pendulum is also a bit lengthy. Excuse me. Um but the Mask of the Red Death, I think that's pretty good. We'll end on that. So uh dun, dun. Yes. All right. The Mask of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal, the redness and the horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest ban which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men, and the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. With When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girded it in. This wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress or egress to the sudden impulses of despair or of frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatori, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there were beauty, there was wine. There was beauty, there was wine. All these and security were within. Without was the Red Death. It was toward the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade. But first let me tell of the rooms in which it was held. There were 7, an imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case was very different. As might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre, the apartments that so irregularly disposed that sorry, The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and at each turn a novel effect. To the right and left, in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass, whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange, the fifth with white, the sixth with violet. The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue. But in this chamber only, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now, in no one of the 7 apartments was there any lamp or candelabrum, amid the profusion of golden ornaments that lay scattered to and fro or depended from the roof. There was no light of any kind emanating from lamp or candle within the suite of chambers, but in the corridors that followed the suite there stood, opposite to each window, a heavy tripod, bearing a brazier of fire that protected its rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illuminated the room. And thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances, but in the western or black chamber the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenances of those who entered, that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. It was in this apartment also that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang, and when the minute hand made the circuit of the face, and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that at each lapse of an hour the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance to hearken to the sound, and thus the waltzers perforce ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company, and while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows, as if in confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled as if at their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows, each to the other, that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. And then, after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,600 seconds of the time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock, and then were the same disconcert and tremulousness and meditation as before. But, in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. He disregarded the decora of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. He had directed in great part the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers upon occasion of this great fete, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the masqueraders. Be sure they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm, much of what has been since seen in Hernani. There were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies, such as the madman fashions. There were much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the seven chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams, and these, the dreams, writhed in and about, taking hue from the rooms and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps. And anon there strikes the ebony clock which stands in the hall of the velvet, and then for a moment all is still, and all is silent, save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away. They have endured but an instant, and a light, half subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. And now again the music swells, and the dreams live and writhe to and fro more merrily than ever, taking hue from the many tinted windows through which stream the rays from the tripods. But to the chamber which lies most westwardly of the seven, there are now none of the maskers who venture, for the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls. And to him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, there comes from the near clock of ebony a muffled peal more solemnly emphatic than any which reaches their ears who indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life, and the revel went whirlingly on, until at length there commenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock. And then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened, perhaps, that more of the thought crept, with more of time, into the meditations of the thoughtful among those who revelled. And thus, too, it happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure which had arrested the attention of no single individual before, and the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz or murmur, expressive of disapprobation and surprise, then, finally, of terror, of horror and disgust. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had out Heroded Herod, and gone before the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the hearts of the most reckless, which cannot be touched without emotion. Even the most utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally jests, there are matters of which no jest can be made. The whole company indeed seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat, and yet all this might have been endured, if not approved, by the mad revellers around. But the mummer had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. when the eyes of Prince Prospero fell upon the spectral image, which, with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its role, stalked to and fro among the waltzers, he was seen to be convulsed in the first moment with a strong shudder, either of terror or distaste, but in the next his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares," he demanded hoarsely of the courtiers who stood near him, "who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know whom we have to hang at sunrise from the battlements." It was in the eastern or blue chamber in which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room where stood the prince, with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder, who at the moment was also near at hand, and now, with deliberate and stately step, made closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe with which the mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party, there were found none who put forth hand to seize him, so that, unimpeded, he passed within a yard of the prince's person, and while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the rooms to the walls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the first, through the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, through this again to the white, and even thence to the violet, ere a decided movement had been made to arrest him. It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of a deadly terror that had seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger, and had approached in rapid impetuosity to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which instantly afterwards fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the mummer, though whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and corpse-like mask which they handled with so violent a rudeness, untenanted by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death had held illimitable dominion over all. Thank you for joining me on another episode of A Winter of Horror. I appreciate you being here as we've explored the joys and the macabre delights of Edgar Allan Poe. And I wish you a happy and thoughtful evening with just enough spookiness to allow you to grapple with the tough questions of life. And I wish you peace and success in your grapple. And with that, I will say good night.